All right, Brian Baker, co-director of International Action Centre, can join us now to speak more on what we've been hearing and the overall picture. Brian, Obama plans to target the Islamic State in Syrian territory. We heard that. The move has prompted a reaction from Moscow. I believe we might be able to take a listen just to Sergei Lavrov on this.
There
are fears these strikes could not only target Islamic militants, but also the Syrian army, to weaken Assad's position. That would amount to a colossal escalation of the conflict in the Middle East and North Africa.
Brian, is Russia right to be concerned here?
Yes. By the way, I'm a representative of the Answer Coalition. Russia is completely right. The Obama administration tonight said that they have the right to strike forces, whomever they declare to be the enemy in Syria, without the consent of the Syrian government. In fact, they made it clear that they won't work with the Syrian government. That's a violation of international law. The U.S. government has no right whatsoever to arrogate to itself the right to use force in Syria, a country that is technically at peace with the United States. I think even moreover, what we've seen here is a dishonest presentation to the American people. The Obama administration is laying the basis for the reintervention of direct military forces by the United States into Syria. And it's become quite clear in the recent years that the Syrian opposition, the armed opposition, which includes the Islamic State, can't defeat the Assad government without direct foreign military intervention. I think that's the great danger, or one of the great dangers, with Obama's speech tonight.
Well, Obama also said that he is the authorization necessary for the action. But what about congressional approval? Doesn't he need to actually ask for that and get it?
Well, yes, and of course, Congress actually doesn't want to have a vote because in spite of what you hear in the U.S. mass media, the American people are really opposed to any new war in Syria or in Iraq. Matter of fact, that's why Obama has to ridiculously promise that there won't be any boots on the ground. It's an existential threat to America, but there won't be any troops sent, because he's telling the American people, we won't have any bleeding done on our side, only Iraqis or Syrians will bleed. But in Congress, the Congress people don't want to vote. Of course, it's their congressional obligation. The U.S. Constitution says, and it should be quite clear, that only Congress can declare war. And this is a declaration of war, whether you call it that or not. When you go and bomb another country, kill its people, that's a declaration of war, in fact.
And what we've just heard from the president, he's very firm in his intentions about what he wants to do. He wants to go after Islamic State in Iraq and Syria if necessary. Could the U.S. bomb Islamic State positions without a UN resolution, though?
Right. The United States is now conveniently ignoring the United Nations because they know the United Nations, both in the Security Council and the General Assembly, will not accept the U.S. right to do this again. The Obama administration has proclaimed itself tonight the fourth straight U.S. presidential administration to say, I am going to bomb Iraq. They did it in the first Bush administration, then Clinton, then the next Bush administration, and now Obama. Each time the pretext is noble. It's to fight terrorism or to stop weapons of mass destruction or to stop Islamic extremism. The fact of the matter is, and I think the world knows and the UN knows, that we would not be in this crisis right now if the United States had not fractured Iraq, had not fractured Libya, and had not fueled a civil war in Syria that gives rise to this kind of jihadist extremism as exemplified by the Islamic State.
Brian, something else we've just heard reiterated by the president is that he's seeking the permission of Congress to train the so-called moderate Syrian and Iranian rebels in Saudi Arabia. He said that about the opposition, particularly in Syria, just a few moments ago. But we've heard reports that the group of moderate rebels sold an American journalist who was later beheaded to the Islamic State militants. Is it therefore reasonable to train these people?
Yeah, I mean, who are the moderate opposition? I mean, who are they gave their social security numbers or they did a consumer credit report? I mean, what does it mean that they were the moderate opposition? These are just labels. The fact of the matter is Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, with the United States, with Britain, have been funding all of the armed groups, giving them heavy weapons, fueling the civil war against Syria. And as you said, these Syrian armed moderate opposition, who knows what they really are? They sold Salaf to the ISIS, and we also know that they have been committing crimes against the people in the towns that they have allegedly liberated, and that's why big parts of those populations have risen up against the Free Syrian Army or the other groups. The fact of the matter is many of them have now joined the Islamic State. That's where the Islamic State got many of its weapons. Maybe they first went through the Free Syrian Army, but today they're with the Islamic State. The U.S. helped create the Islamic State, perhaps by unintended consequences of its acts in Syria and Iraq, and then uses the Islamic State as a pretext to carry out another war in Syria. But again, as you could see by President Obama's speech tonight, really designed to overthrow a government that he says is illegitimate, even though it's the sovereign government of Syria and recognized as such by the United Nations.
Just on a human level here, what does Obama's plan to carry out airstrikes mean for Syrian civilians right now?
Well, I think for both Syrian civilians and Iraqi civilians, it's more death and destruction. I mean, let's face it, 5 million Iraqis have already been made refugees because of the U.S. invasion. Millions of Syrians are refugees. More than 150,000 are dead, again, as a consequence of a foreign-fueled armed civil war. How can the Obama administration, with a straight face, say it's now coming to the rescue of Syrian civilians, when in fact they didn't give a damn about Syrian civilians, as they put as their top priority the toppling of an independent nationalist government that was targeted for destruction simply because it was an independent rather than a puppet government in this resource-rich part of the world.
Now, Obama stated that there will be no American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. Do you believe the U.S. is going to stick to this promise?
No, there are already combat troops. There's more than 1,000 U.S. combat troops. All troops are combat troops. They're armed. They're in Iraq right now. They're functioning as advisors. And one step leads to another step. If the U.S. does not succeed in its objectives, either in Syria or in Iraq, the fact that the Obama administration has made this nationally and internationally televised statement about its commitment to destroy the Islamic State, or, as you could see, the Assad government as well, if the United States does not succeed militarily with the air campaign, it's only logical that they will, in order to avoid the defeat or perception of defeat, add more and more troops. That's the logic of this escalation.
And experts say that the war against the Islamic State could last several years. In your opinion, does the West have the resources for that kind of prolonged campaign that we've seen time and time before?
Well, if you think of it as an effort by the United States to resume its supreme role in Iraq and to maintain a civil war in Syria where all of the bleeding and suffering is done among Syrians and the American population is shielded from that kind of suffering, perhaps the U.S. government can continue this kind of prolonged conflict. The real issue will become whether or not, when they're faced with a failure, and I think they will fail again as they have in other policies in Iraq and Syria, whether that will lead to escalation or whether it will lead to a broader regional, I believe, a catastrophic regional war. We don't know where this stops. It's easy to start wars. It's hard to stop them. The U.S. government is arrogating to itself the right to bomb cities and towns all over Syria, all over Iraq, all over anywhere, in fact. And of course, we know where this has led before. 1 million Iraqis are dead who would not have been dead otherwise, because the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, because it fractured that country, because it destroyed it. Tens of thousands of Libyans and 150,000 Syrians.
Brian Becker from the Answer Coalition, great to get your outtake on all those topics. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.